warm welcome to everyone. I think our collective prayers this morning have worked. We have a beautiful morning, so thank you for those prayers. My name's Brett Mason and I'm your MC for this morning's commemoration of Australia's Coastwatchers and celebration of the erection of a plaque in their honour just a few hundred metres away near the bank of the Brisbane River. And I'll invite you to take a look at the plaque just a little later. Ladies and gentlemen, if I might first, in the spirit of reconciliation, acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which we meet, the Turrbal and Yagara peoples, and in today's spirit of commemoration, acknowledge all those who have fought, served, and those who have died in Australia's name, especially, on this occasion, Australia's Coastwatchers. Might I acknowledge and thank several people. First of all, it is most fitting, the Right Honourable the Lord Mayor, Councillor Adrian Schrinner. Good morning, Lord Mayor. And the Lady Mayoress, Mrs Nina Schrinner. Councillor Julia Dixon. Julia is the Councillor for Hamilton Ward. I saw Dr Denver Beanland is here, former Attorney General and past President of the Royal Historical Society. I saw Don Cameron, the former member for Moreton. Petty Officer Noel Christoffel, representing the Commanding Officer of HMAS Moreton. And Brigadier Giles Cornelia, representing the Commander of the 1st Australian Division. Matthew Rowe, immediate past President of the Navy League of Australia, and Harvey Greenfield, President of the Queensland Division of the Navy League of Australia. Paul Brown, representing the Papua New Guinea Volunteer Rifles. Caspar Cooper, the Queensland Maritime Museum. President Mike Harris, and Teresa Pokoj of the Australian American Association. Representatives of the United Service Club, the Farm Historical Society, the Submarine Association, the Royal Historical Society of Queensland, the Limber Historical Society, and the Australian National Flag Association. And out of the blue, I'd like to acknowledge on your behalf, you'll all be pleased that he's here, Professor Martin Hadlow, who is with the Solomon Islands Scouts and Coastwatcher Trust. You heard about our meeting this morning and turned up. And to those who assisted with the plaque to commemorate the Coastwatchers, John Gates, Brian Martin, Alison Early, Susan Peatfield and Peter Racy. And last, but certainly, ladies and gentlemen, not least, Dr. Betty Lee. Ladies and gentlemen, without Betty's deadly combination of charm and persistence, the city of Brisbane would still be without a memorial to the wartime contribution of our heroic Coastwatchers. These 600 men and as I am reminded, one very formidable woman will brave all of them. Ladies and gentlemen, 80 years ago this week, atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And this coming Friday, the 15th of August, it will be exactly 80 years since Japan's surrender was announced by the Emperor of Japan. So our commemoration this morning comes at an auspicious time. And in July of last year, we lost our last two Coastwatchers. Jim Burrows' vigil for his country ended at age 101. And coincidentally, Jim's fellow remaining Coastwatcher, Ronald Dixie Lee, passed away about 12 hours later, aged 100. Today, there are no Coastwatchers that we can thank and honour in person. But we are here today to honour their memory and their vital contribution to the Allied war, the Allied effort in the Pacific. Before satellites and before surveillance drones, ladies and gentlemen, it was the Coastwatchers that provided crucial intelligence about Japanese military movements and very often pre-warned of incoming attacks, which enabled the Allies to prepare for the attack. For example, in the Battle of Guadalcanal, which was a turning point of the war in the Pacific, Australian Coastwatchers gave the Americans 2 hours notice of the arrival of Japanese bombers. These were critical warnings in the opening stages of the battle and allowed the Americans to maintain their foothold on the island. Operating behind enemy lines, it was dangerous work. If Coastwatchers were caught, ladies and gentlemen, the best they could hope for was a quick death. As Naval Lieutenant Reg Evans, the Australian Coastwatcher who helped rescue the future US President, John F. Kennedy, and his crew of PT-109, he described it like this: a Coastwatcher's work is to sit in hiding like a spider, right in the web of the enemy, unseen and unheard. We became, said Evans, the eyes and the ears of the Pacific. Coastwatcher reports were crucial for the Allies during the Battle of the Coral Sea and the Solomon Islands and the Papua New Guinea campaigns. For some of us, ladies and gentlemen, for some of us here today, today's commemoration is personal. You will shortly hear from Betty Lee, whose granduncle, Commander Eric Feldt, expanded the Coastwatchers, organising them to become that vital intelligence network in the Southwest Pacific theatre of the war. And it's also personal for me and relatives of mine who are here today. The Coastwatchers Memorial Lighthouse at Madang Harbour, there's a picture behind me, in Papua New Guinea. That memorial lighthouse is 24 metres high. It was built in 1959 as a memorial to the Coastwatchers, then still living, and to the loyal Islander Scouts who made it possible for the Coastwatchers to do their very dangerous work. And it also lists on its plaque the names of 36 men who were killed while carrying out their solitary and dangerous work behind enemy lines during the Second World War. Included in that 36 is Lieutenant Frank Barrett, DCM, a cousin of my mother's, who was a Coastwatcher with M Special Unit and was killed in action in Papua New Guinea on the 24th of October 1943. He was 32. Below his name on the plaque and the names of his fallen comrades is an inscription. The inscription reads, "They watched, they watched, they warned, they died, that we might live, lest we forget." And may I ask the Lord Mayor to commemorate this occasion, and also, Sarah, I think, to make a presentation. Lord Mayor.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Excuse me for the croaky voice. Today is a very special and important day. It's a day that I know I don't need to tell you the importance of, but today is actually about telling others the importance of. See, as we came in today, you would have noticed some people picnicking in the park. You would have noticed a lot of people walking along the Riverwalk. Saw a couple of people fishing in Breakfast Creek. Certainly hope they don't eat what they caught. And probably none of those people would have an understanding of what happened here in the past, particularly what happened in Brisbane in the past during the Second World War. They would walk past Tenerife and not realise, unless they saw the memorial there, submarine base that was there. They would catch a ferry at Brett's Wharf. They would catch a ferry at Brett's Wharf and not realise that that was where the Pensacola convoy arrived during the Second World War. And they walk along the riverfront past Newstead Park, and until today they wouldn't realise the significance of the sacrifice that hundreds of people made, the important work they did in keeping our military commanders informed, in keeping troops, sailors, soldiers and airmen safe, and literally changing the course of the Second World War. And you all know the significance of the Coastwatchers, but today is about making sure others do too. And just like in any military operation, things don't always go to plan. Now we have a couple of our serving officers here, and we have a number of former serving officers, and some of you may be aware, I spent a little bit of time in the Royal Australian Air Force, and at the Defence Force Academy in Canberra, one of the things that always stuck in my mind when we were going through basic military strategy is a concept called the fog of war. And that was a concept developed by Karl von Clausewitz. And it was fundamentally that leaders in military campaigns and battles never have all of the information that they would like to have when they're making decisions, and often they don't really know what on earth is going on out there in the battlefield. They don't necessarily know the strength of the enemy forces. They don't know what's happening in a minute-by-minute situation. There's a lack of information coming through. So we go back to the Second World War and we think about a time before satellites, as Senator Mason mentioned, before over-the-horizon radar, before all of the amazing technology that we have these days. There's very little information coming through to our commanders. But one tiny piece of information can change the course of a battle. It never ceases to amaze me that during the Second World War there were critical battles where one bit of information made an incredible difference and saved so many lives. And in the case of the Coastwatchers, they changed the course of the war in the Pacific. The information that they provided would not have otherwise been available. Decisions would have been made without that. Lives would have been lost. And so whether it's the Battle of Guadalcanal, which was an absolute critical turning point where the Japanese were starting to build an airfield, the airfield would have put Japanese planes and bombers within reach of Papua New Guinea, which then would have put them in reach of Australia. You can only imagine how the course of history and the course of the war could have changed without the kind of information being provided by the Coastwatchers. Absolutely critical, absolutely game-changing. And as the people picnic in the park, maybe they don't realise that the freedom that they enjoy today in a wonderful country and a wonderful city rests on the shoulders of the people like the Coastwatchers that put themselves in incredible danger. 36 lost their lives, some of them killed and tortured brutally. All of them were in danger. They would have been treated as spies. And spies, as Senator Mason mentioned, they could hope for a quick death at best. So today, we see a plaque that will be put in place that will give those walkers along the River Walk the opportunity to learn a critical part of our national history, of Brisbane's history, a missing piece of the puzzle. Now hopefully it is a reason for people to pause and appreciate what we have today, to think about the sacrifice that was made, and also to create a sense of unity amongst us as well, to know that we are a people, we are a nation that in times of adversity does amazing things and will step forward on behalf of others. But today would not be possible without a few very passionate individuals and dedicated individuals. So much history, even though it's been documented, can become lost to the wider community. Until now, there is no memorial or plaque to the Coastwatchers in Australia. Nothing. We heard about the lighthouse, which is pictured over here. That's not in Australia. And so a nation of people that owe so much to the Coastwatchers didn't have anything that was permanent to acknowledge their sacrifice and their service. And the other thing that's important as well is that this is a uniquely Brisbane-linked story, because Commander Feldt, who was the champion, the founder, the expander of the Coastwatch network, was a Brisbane person and lived alongside the river, I understand, in an apartment in Hamilton, was it? Newstead, New Farm. So it is a uniquely connected Brisbane story, and something that I'm proud that we can honour and celebrate. But I have to say, sometimes ensuring these commemorations happen can involve a lot of bureaucratic hurdles. And Betty, you're laughing. I know you haven't always been laughing. And thank you for laughing, because otherwise you would cry. But I appreciate your persistence, and a couple of your supporters as well, who really worked hard over many years to make this happen. Without you, there wouldn't be that permanent memorial. And this has been genuinely a community-led action from Betty and from a couple of her colleagues who funded the plaque, and now will make sure it is there forever for people to see and to learn. And so, Councillor Dixon, thank you. We have a small presentation to make to you, just to say thank you for your persistence, for what you've done. On behalf of the City of Brisbane, on behalf of Julia and I, thank you. Thank you so much. Please, ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause. Now, we're going to hand over to Betty to say a few words, but before I do, I just wanted to thank Brett Mason as well for your words. And I just had to say, every time I see Brett, I have to acknowledge Brett has been critical in giving both Nina and I a leg up in our political career. Both Nina and I at different times worked for Brett when he was a senator. And we absolutely love you, Brett, and thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please give Betty another round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This is not just for me, this is for my group of devoted Coastwatcher clan. John Gates and Susan Peatfield, Alison Early and Brian Martin and Peter Racy, all of us have contributed to this, so it's very kind and unexpected, and we really do appreciate all that the Brisbane City Council have done to help. I don't have a loud voice, so can you hear me? No. Okay. How can you hear me now? All right. Well, thank you again, Lord Mayor, for those very kind words, and to Brett too for his very kind words. And let me continue with a thank you to all those who have helped bring this memorial to fruition. The Brisbane City Council, especially the Lord Mayor and Councillor Julia Dixon and the Hamilton Ward. and John Gates for putting me on this path and his steadfast devotion in this venture. My Aunt Brenda Tate for her knowledge, acumen and support. Levi Addison of Addison Memorials. I don't know if Levi's here today. Anyway, and then John Gates, Susan Peatville and Peter Racy for implementing the petition, and Peter Racy for suggesting the park. All those who signed the petition. Denver Beanland for drawing our attention to the gazebo. Brett Mason, again, for being the Master of Ceremonies today. John Gates, Brian Martin, Susan Peatfield and Alison Early, who together with myself provided the finance for the plaque. And everyone who has contributed in various ways to making this event at Newstead House here today what it is. And all of you attending here today, some of you who have come from afar. We are all here because we care about the Coastwatchers. We have a total of 8 children of Coastwatchers and 1 grandchild with us today. Their fathers were Paul Mason, Connell Gill, Jared Ballet and Snow Evans. There are others here who are related to the Coastwatchers, like Brett Mason to Frank Barrett, and 14 others, including myself, related to Eric Feldt. We are here today to celebrate a plaque and the existence of a heroic group known in Australia as the Coastwatchers. Although there were Coastwatchers all around Australia, this plaque is a memorial to the Ferdinand Group of Coastwatchers, led by Commander Eric Feldt in the Australian Island territories of Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands in the Pacific in World War II. At long last, we have a plaque that symbolises our gratitude to that brave band and their devotion to keeping Australia safe. Most of you know the amazing story of the Coastwatchers. They were like any group who went before or will be seen again. This is just a brief summary. Coastwatching was an initiative of the Australian Naval Board. The initial Coastwatchers in Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands were volunteer civilians who had teleradios. From September 1939 to November 1941, Eric Feldt went all around the islands recruiting people to be Coastwatchers and teaching them Coastwatching Playfair Code. When the Japanese swept down through the islands in 1942, some Coastwatchers escaped. Some were killed and others stayed on. Many had no choice but to live in the steamy, muddy, disease-ridden jungles, spying on the enemy, hiding from them, and sending out their vital messages by their cumbersome teleradios. The jungle is like an enemy itself. If captured, the endurance and bravery of the Coastwatchers was incredible. If captured, they faced likely torture and certain death. Eric Feldt's duties were varied and demanding. He was keenly aware of the dangers his Coastwatchers faced, and also the importance of ensuring they were in optimal position below the Japanese flight paths to be able to spot the planes. This was especially true for the Battle of Guadalcanal, where the Coastwatchers' part began with Paul Mason on Bougainville, sending out that now legendary message, 24 torpedo bombers headed yours. Eventually, the civilian Coastwatchers were taken into the Navy. Over time, servicemen from all 3 military services became Coastwatchers. The Navy required Eric Feldt to give his Coastwatchers a cover name to protect them from the Japanese. He chose Ferdinand, the name of the fictional bull who did not fight but scent and smelt the flowers. He intended this to remind the Coastwatchers that it was not their duty to physically fight, but to sit and gather information as inconspicuously as possible. It was the Coastwatchers' early warnings of planes and ships and troops which gave the Allies such an enormous advantage. Forewarned is forearmed. In particular, it was essential for Allied planes to be in prime position in the air rather than being sitting ducks on the aircraft carriers or the airfield grounds. They were like a human version of radar, only better than radar because they could provide description. They also helped rescue many people, including future President John F. Kennedy. However, the Coastwatchers' main contribution was in intelligence. In those dark days of 1942, when the Japanese held the upper hand in the war in the Pacific, the Coastwatchers' activity was vital in getting the balance of power to swing the Allies' way. Without the Coastwatchers, the fight would have taken much longer and a greater number of people would have lost their lives. We would not be celebrating the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II now. It would still be 2 or more years in the future. In seeking a monument for the Coastwatchers, we initially requested a site for a monument because, as the lawman says, although Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands have enormous monuments to the Coastwatch, there are none in Australia. While our memorial is much more modest, it has many marvellous features. According to the last Coastwatcher, Jim Burrows, who passed away last year at the age of 101, 3 elements were essential for the success of the Coastwatchers. They were the Coastwatchers themselves, help from the local people, and the tele-radio. These elements are depicted in the images and wording on the plaque. I would add there are other necessary elements, like the submarines, which evacuated the exhausted and sick Coastwatchers and replaced them with well ones, and which brought back servicemen and civilians rescued by the Coastwatchers, and the Catalina flying boats, which dropped much-needed supplies to the Coastwatchers. The position of the plaque is excellent, looking to the Brisbane River, in which the submarines and Catalinas were moored. They were essential lifelines for the Coastwatchers and are imaged on the plaque. The positioning is a top-notch one for now and for the future. Today, people walking along the footpath can stop and see the plaque. With the Olympic Stadium being positioned in Victoria Park, it is not hard to envisage athletes and attendees from all over the world coming to the Brisbane River here at Newstead. Many will stop to read the plaque and see Australia has not forgotten these heroes. As wonderful as the plaque is, there's only so much that can be inscribed on a limited space. Surely the most essential element for the success of the Coastwatchers was a dedicated person to set them up and a brilliant leader to do his utmost to protect them. This person was our Queensland and Brisbane hero, Commander Eric Feldt. The huge responsibility of caring for his Coastwatchers took its toll, and he suffered a heart attack in the Solomon Islands in 1943. This affected his health for the rest of his life and meant he was someone who gave up his health and his career for his country. His name is not on our plaque. He was modest, and I believe he would have wanted the Coastwatchers as a whole to have memory recognition above any for himself. However, I think it is fair to say that without Eric Feldt, there would not have been the Coastwatchers as we know them. No Coastwatchers to save Guadalcanal, which saved the South Pacific, as spoken by Admiral Halsey. No Coastwatcher to save President Kennedy. And no Coastwatchers to achieve the many amazing feats that they did in those dark days in the Australian territories so close to mainland Australia and Queensland. So what I'm about to say might come as a surprise, and I am wondering if it would be at all possible, with a wish that comes from me, but others here might well concur, in asking the Brisbane City Council to please consider providing a plaque matching the one donated by our group to be placed on the other front column of the gazebo to honour the memory of Commander Eric Feldt. I know the council has done a lot already. However, it would complete the story, and Brisbane citizens and visitors from around the world would see that our Brisbane hero, Commander Eric Feldt, has not been forgotten. I believe his Coastwatchers would have wanted that too, lest we forget. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Betty, for your beautiful words, and I'm sure that Commander Feldt would be very touched by what you said today, as well as the other Coastwatchers who are not with us here today. I also just want to say thank you very much, and thank you to the Lord Mayor, the Lady Mayoress, for coming along as well to acknowledge this really important occasion, as well as our MCs, former Senator Brett Mason, and also other dignitaries from the Navy and the military, and also to John Gates and to Susan Peatfield and Brian Martin and Alison Early, who also financially contributed to the plaque. So we'll have to take the Lord Mayor down there very shortly in a few weeks, perhaps to look at it in person. But again, thank you so much. They were very beautiful words, and I really enjoyed the story. And I think for the younger people here as well today, particularly the children, it's very important that they don't forget the sacrifice that many made in World War II. And so thank you again, Betty.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your patience this morning. That brings us to an end. Could I invite you...